welcome everyone. I think this is really an exciting day. Here we are finally at our very first Kubernetes Community Days in Indonesia. Funny story, we already planned this event actually since, I don't know, I think 2019. But because of the pandemic, we have to postpone this kind of event until, yeah, finally today. So despite being hosted virtually, I hope that everyone here will have fun and then also get a bunch of inspiration from all of the speakers. And most importantly, I hope that all of you will learn a lot of things today from everyone here. So yeah, as you already can see, we have our very special guest opening our event today, Kelsey Hightower. Kelsey is very popular in Indonesia, especially for his amazing work in educating Kubernetes and cloud native technology and practices. And lots of people learn from him, especially from his book, Kubernetes Up and Running, including me, and also from his great tutorial, Kubernetes the Hard Way. So, hi, Kelsey. Thanks for coming.
Hey, happy to be here.
How's life there?
It's good. It's Thanksgiving holiday, so I have family and good food, so I can't complain.
Cool. So I don't know if you still remember that. I think I think about a year ago, we had conversation on my podcast. Do you still remember that?
Probably, but I've probably done 100 podcasts. So if I miss, but there's only one podcast I've done in Indonesia, so I definitely remember that one.
Yeah, that's me. Okay, so since our last conversation, would you like to tell us something that you recently know about Indonesia? That probably you recently know about Indonesia?
Oh, I don't think I've learned much. There's been a lot going on in the world. There's so much to keep track of in the US. There's still a pandemic. There's still people trying to figure out how to recover. So I'm not sure that I've learned much more than last time.
Yeah, I think everyone, when I ask them, do you know about Indonesia? They keep saying, I know Bali. That's the one thing that they only know usually. But yeah, that's okay. So I heard that, I saw your tweet as well. You recently got promoted to principal engineer, right? From your previous role as staff developer advocate. So what's really changed in your daily activity?
Well, not much. I still work on products. I spend a lot of time on the serverless side. So like Cloud Run, Cloud Functions, our managed services. And of course, I still work in the Kubernetes container space. But I would do a lot more high level work in what we call horizontal. So work more across GCP. And of course, I spend more time in like design, product reviews, that kind of thing. And of course, with a lot of our customers that are trying to design how their cloud footprint's going to be. So very similar to the previous role, but maybe slightly different in terms of the advocacy work. Not as much talks, not as much conference speaking.
I see. So is there any new book or tutorial that you are currently working on right now?
No, don't give me too much more work. I think these days I'm studying, I think a lot of people are still struggling with app design. I think at this stage, so much of the technology we're using before is getting way more stable. So I think if I ever write another book again, because it's a lot of work to do so, I'll probably start talking about what is it like to build end-to-end applications. Typically, we write books on one specific technology like Kubernetes, but these days, a lot of people want to know how does the whole thing work, from authorization to authentication to your application and database design. I think we all forget database design is probably one of the biggest challenges in dealing with applications today. So if you ever see another book from me, it will probably be about the entire software development experience.
Okay. So I think there is one phenomena that I saw on the Twitter. So I remember that you created a repository called No Code, right? And then the funny thing is that several companies or several companies try to create product by using that kind of term, no code. So what do you think about that? Is that something that you expect, or?
I hope I didn't invent that term. That was a joke, and I think the joke went and got really, really popular. But the concept for you all that are maybe watching that are unfamiliar with no code was this idea that do we really need to be writing all of these new software projects, constantly reinventing the wheel? I think the answer is no. But yeah, you start to see, low code, this idea that you can just kind of drag and drop or use these lightweight frameworks to build purpose-built things. But this no code concept, I don't even know how to start with that, but I think a lot of people are trying to just make software development easier for people who are not traditionally software engineers or who do not want to write code to just build simple applications. So I welcome it.
Cool. Thank you. because you don't know recent news about Indonesia, so I would like to tell you something. So I'm gonna give a bit context. So Indonesia is actually has 270 million people across 17,000 island, right? And then we have recent tech booming for the past 5 to 7 years. And I think when we spoke 1 year ago, at the time we only have 5 unicorns. And today we already have 10 to 12 unicorn. I cannot recall exactly how many it is, but that's really exciting, right? To see in the just past 1 year, we have new unicorn coming despite the situation and the pandemic and that kind of thing. So uh, the tech ecosystem in Indonesia is still super young. Demand is very high, but unfortunately, the talent supply is very low right now. So I would like to ask, do you have any thought about this? What should we do in to face this kind of situation? As how do young engineers or probably engineering students can grow optimally in this kind of situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's many tools you can use. I think some people have things like code schools or maybe a non-traditional learning mechanism. In the US, there's tons of these code schools. These are like, 3 to 9 month programs where you can help people get started. I think the other big part of this is that companies are going to need to be willing to take people who are switching careers. You can't always just hire senior engineers with 20 years of experience. Sometimes you're going to have to go out and invest in talent. So there's going to be people who are really early in their career, and I think companies are going to have to help out with this. So when I hear people say there's a shortage in talent, I think a lot of times it means that we just haven't figured out how to curate talent in the pipeline. So look, go to those code schools, hire people who only have that 9 months of transitional experience, and then give them work that allows them to grow into the particular role. So I think we're going to need traditional and non-traditional education sources. But again, I think just going to have the whole community, including the companies that are hiring, realize that all talent is going to be senior talent.
Okay, cool. So if we go to the code school, so actually what they're gonna learn there is actually the basic stuff, right? Like how to start learning Python and that kind of thing. And in your opinion, after what they should do after, let's say, company hired them and then they get into the company, what they should do after that? Because probably company has different needs, right? Probably what they have learned during the code school and probably during the boot camp is not really help them in directly jump into the technology used by that company. So what should they do at the time?
Well, I mean, I've hired a lot of people in my past. There's so many other roles than having everyone writing code, right? I think sometimes having more people do testing. So if I had a new developer that isn't super experienced writing code, but they do have some skills and they can grow over time, allow them to write some unit tests, allow them to do some manual testing of the product and improve the quality of the product. Tech support, very important role. If you don't have really great tech support now, you can probably bring in people to help on the support side. And then everyone has a backlog of work that maybe your senior engineers cannot prioritize, but it's the type of work that a new engineer can do, even if it's going to take them a much longer time. So I got to think about, if you're going to be a company thinking about this, you got to think of that first 3 to 6 months. You may not be able to get a fully productive employee coming in on day one, but just having the type of work kind of lined up, we're going to have them start in QA. After 3 months, maybe we'll move them into somewhere like support, maybe after 3 months. And of course, they can continue learning where they left off in things like a code school, if you will.
I see. So it's really important for a company to think about how the pipeline for career development for new engineers and new people coming to the company, right? Okay.
Yeah, most companies are not good at this. Most people just we need 3 people to just do the code, and they just want to hire and say, just go write the code. But we're going to have to do a much better job than that. We're going to have to start curating talent and do a better job of retaining talent, because you don't want to lose the people you hire immediately.
Yeah, cool. So talking about learning, so we know that CNCF has a bunch of technologies. If you open Landscape CNCF, you will get too much information.
A million logos, a million projects.
That's right. So I'm just curious, how do you catch up with all of this technology? How do you try to learn that? What is the strategy for keep updated?
I don't try to learn them all. I know the fundamentals. There's networking, there's compute, there's storage, there's security. These are my fundamental buckets.
Okay.
And depending on the type of work that I'm doing or the type of customers I'm working with, I make sure I understand the fundamentals. I learned SQL a long time ago. Turns out people are still using SQL today in 2021. Yeah. Storage is roughly similar. So I think most people, if you know the fundamentals then I think you can actually switch to any of these new projects and just ask, what part of the stack is it trying to solve? What are the fundamentals that it implements? And then for me, I only need a couple of days to kind of put my hands on it, look at its feature set, and maybe see if it can do something that I needed to do. But other than that, I try to prioritize my learning based on the problem in front of me. I don't spend a lot of time trying to learn all of the logos. I might read the product page, but I'm not going to necessarily try to spin something up all the time.
Yeah. So yeah, I think I agree with that. So that's the thing that I also tell to everyone when they talk to me about how to uh, learn effectively, right? So usually you're gonna start with fundamental, and after that, no matter which technology or specific technology that you use, it basically the same. It's using the same fundamental. So that's why sometimes I see that people directly jump to the technology, even when, especially when they don't really know the basic, and then probably they ended up knowing nothing about the technology. So I think it's a really waste of time. Yeah, that's interesting. So one thing that I observe in this country is that people keep confused about when they should start using this Kubernetes and cloud native technology. What's your take on this?
I mean, if you think about it, like let's think about crutches. If you break your leg, if your leg isn't broken, you're not going to go get crutches, right? When should you use crutches? When you need them, right? So I think when it comes to technology, you don't just have to say, oh, everyone else is using Kubernetes, you should go run and use it. I think the best thing to know is like when you actually have a need. So let me give you some examples. If you have everything kind of working on VMs and for the most part, everything's working well, maybe you don't need Kubernetes right now. That probably makes a lot of sense. I do think companies do have a roadmap of things that they wish could get done. Maybe you're using Terraform today, maybe you're using some cloud providers, some low-level infrastructure, but you don't have centralized logging, or you don't really have a good health check mechanism. You don't have a good scheduler that can schedule things between multiple zones. Once you start to add all of those things up, then Kubernetes starts to get super interesting, because the alternative is that you're going to have to go out and build those things yourself. So once you start to get to that crossroad that you're either going to build it yourself or you can bring it in via something like Kubernetes, I think that's when it starts to make the most sense.
Yeah, agree. So I suddenly remember that we had conversation on my podcast about platform on top of platform. So I think you also tweeted a long time back, and then I attended KubeCon last October in LA, right? And then I see there are a lot of companies with their offering. Basically, they're providing something on top of Kubernetes. There's a company that provide monitoring tools for Kubernetes workload, and there's also a company that providing backup feature so that we can back up the cluster easily. And do you think that this is the correct direction for Kubernetes and its ecosystem? Where do you see Kubernetes in the next 5 years?
Well, look, the people that want to assemble all of those pieces, like a backup solution, networking solution, monitoring solution, people will probably be doing that for another 25, 30 years. Who knows? And while they're doing that, I think Kubernetes just has such a rich ecosystem. If people that need to do that, people that want to do that, will probably use Kubernetes to do that. So, of course, you'll see more and more verticals or industries or solutions pop up around that. I think the question really comes down to is, how fast would the alternatives mature? Things like serverless Cloud Run, there's the thing called App Runner over Azure. And I think when you look at all of these things, the question would be is, when do the other platforms mature to the point where you don't need to go do that anymore? So that's what I'm paying attention towards. Everyone that's kind of assembling their platforms, I'm glad that ecosystem exists, because I don't think serverless offerings today do a very good job of running an expansive set of workloads. So there's going to be a place for Kubernetes. But one thing where you can get a really good hint is GKE Autopilot. I think that is kind of a peek at the future. Maybe we hide the cluster and the machines and all of these things, and we just start dealing with a more higher level version of Kubernetes that minus the infrastructure component. So I think that's where we're going to end up going, more curated distributions of Kubernetes, if you will.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I get it. Let's talk about something that I think it's really close to us. It's about being underrepresented community and country in tech. So we all know that you are one of the role model in tech communities, right? And then you also came from the underrepresented group in tech. So can you share, or would you like to share, the challenges that you faced during your journey, and how did you tackle all of those?
If we continue to approach it from underrepresented, then yeah, we'll be talking about this forever. Maybe there's other groups that are overrepresented.
Okay, yeah.
Right? Maybe people are just overrepresented, right? Maybe we switch it around.
Mhm.
I think honestly, if you're in your home country, then that means there's just a ton of opportunity, right? Maybe we don't have to rely on everyone else to do everything. It just turns out that you can actually learn the same set of things. You can invest in that type of knowledge. You can actually do for yourself. When you move into environments where there's overrepresentation,
okay,
and maybe that overrepresentation might mean you're not given equal opportunity to learn the right things. You're not presented the set of problems. You don't get hired at certain companies. That's been a challenge for a very long time, not just in tech, but in society in general. When it comes to that, I think we're just going to have to persevere. But one solution is creating our own spaces where we don't necessarily have to be underrepresented all the time. And I think that's going to be an additional strategy. So yes, we can talk all day long about dealing with being underrepresented and those kind of things. But I also think we got to think about how much power we actually have, where we are well represented, where we need to be. And I would like to send more people focusing there. There's going to be a ton of work doing equity and inclusion work inside of those organizations. But don't forget, where you currently are, there's a lot of need for what you can do and continue to skill up.
Okay, cool. So I got to think about that. So okay, let's talk about being let's say do something in our country, right? So let's take example of this kind of event, or probably yeah, let's take example for this event. So actually this event is the first our Kubernetes community days. We already have many communities in Indonesia, but we already have the opportunity. We already give the opportunity to people so that they can, let's say, share their knowledge or probably their work to these conferences. But given that kind of situation, we still have less number of people probably submitting CFP, or less number of people than we expect to join this kind of event. So even though we already give some space for them, people still not, it's not encouraging them to join that kind of event. So I'm just kind of wondering right now. So what is the next thing that we can do to fix this kind of situation, especially when we already tried to ask community to get into that, and yeah, but it still doesn't work.
Well, first question to ask is, does your community care about speaking at conferences like this? The answer may be no. Okay. There are some people who can care less about speaking at conferences like this. So maybe it's the wrong thing for your community. You don't have to do what everybody else is doing, right? If other people come speak at the conference, maybe that's not what your community needs. Maybe it's time for something different. Maybe there's time for a different style. Maybe there's something, maybe there's time for a different format. You know, even I get a little bored of CFP, technology, clap, 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 ask the same questions. Can we not do something different? What's unique to your culture? Maybe you can bring that to the technology world and we can try something different. So oftentimes what I'll see is people are not attracted to the same thing. So maybe I would say, take a step back and ask, what's unique to our community? What do they prefer doing? Maybe it isn't like the tech conferences that we see in other parts of the world. So maybe it's not a bad thing. Maybe the community is telling you something. Our culture is different. That's not appealing to us. Maybe we don't want to do that. Now, on the flip side, maybe people do want to do that. And maybe there's a reason why they don't feel confident. Maybe they don't feel like they're experts. If you're listening to this and you say, hey, I'm not going to speak until I'm an expert. Well, I don't do that. I talk about a lot of topics that I'm learning. So learning in public, I think, is a good exercise. So maybe that's something you have to communicate to people, that we're not only looking for people who are authoritative or experts. Maybe it's okay if you're just learning and you just want to learn in front of other people. So I think think about both approaches.
Yeah. Talking about learning in public, how you do that? Do you do that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, you know, like when I'm on Twitter and I'm talking about a new technology, right? So maybe it's a competitor, maybe Google is announcing some new technology. What I'll do is just evaluate it in honest and say, hey, I'm going to try this things out. And sometimes I'll write it out as a tutorial on GitHub. Sometimes I would just live tweet, hey, I'm trying this. I'm clicking here. I got this error. I'm not sure what's going on. And then what happens is people in public will say, let us take a look at it. Hey, have you tried this? Thanks for reporting this particular error. Or I'll just ask a question. Hey, I'm trying to do this with Istio or Envoy, and something doesn't quite make sense. Can someone look at what I try to tell me if I'm doing it right or wrong? And I think what you have to do is just understand that there will be feedback, and the people who look down on you for getting it wrong, well, look, they're never going to be helpful.
Yeah.
But most of our tech community, at least the part that I interact with, they tend to be very helpful and say, oh, we see what you're trying to do. Try it this way. And so I think for me, learning in public has been super valuable, and it allowed me to kind of progress much faster than trying to learn everything by myself.
Yeah, I think what people are afraid of is about being wrong when they learn in public. So how did you tackle this kind of feeling? If you, let's say you did something wrong and then people keep probably reply with bad messages on bad tweets, how did you tackle that? How do you handle that situation?
Remember what it's called. It's called learning.
Okay.
Ideally, if you're learning, you don't know how it works.
Yeah.
So when it comes to learning, you're not expected to necessarily have the answer. This is not a test in grade school. This is learning. So if someone says, hey, I tried this and it doesn't work, and now we're going to find out who the teachers are. The teachers will show up and say, oh, let me show you what you're doing, and then you can learn from them. Yeah. Anyone that is criticizing, those are the people we need to stay away from. If someone says, oh, you're dumb because you've gotten that wrong, then those are the people I just stay away from, because they're not going to be very useful in my journey to learn. So I just know who to ignore.
Yeah. I personally experienced that probably a couple of days ago, where I asked, I actually still trying to figure out how this Web3 and blockchain and all of these things make sense to me, right? And then I created a tweet asking how this makes sense. And then people keep replying with some useful information. So I think that's also, new way to learn. It's not only about doing live stream and then do live coding, that kind of thing, but we can also try different approach to learn in public, like making question, asking questions so that other people can help answering that. That's perfectly makes sense. Thank you, Kelsey, for that. So one last question before I give the opportunity to the attendees to ask the question. So what's hot right now that people should start learning apart from Kubernetes?
Human skills. That's what's hot. I think a lot of people have been in home for so long, they've forgotten how to interact with people. People have forgotten, like, just being nice. That's a skill. Being respectful. That's a skill. So there are more than technical skills. So I think what's hot right now is learning to be civilized, learning that a lot of people are going through a lot of stuff right now. So you can actually go study those skills as well. So look, we can talk about networking, service mesh, serverless, Kubernetes, lots of those. There will always be those. But I think what's hot right now is just rediscovering that we are humans. And when the time is appropriate, more than likely, we'll get to interact with each other again. And so I'm thinking maybe we can start thinking about how to be better at interacting with each other when the time comes. So that would be my recommendation.
Okay, so can you please tell me one thing that you learned during this pandemic about that skill?
Oh, so for me, studying things like the financial system and how it affects other parts of the world, different people on different monetary systems. Some of them are attracted to this alternative type of money out here because they feel that they're not liberated by those things. And when you look at people that don't have access to the financial system, things are hard for them. They're hard in ways that are not hard for me. I also learned how to cook other dishes. So I've been learning how to cook Ethiopian food and just really enjoying what goes into those ingredients and how their recipes are put together, and being very patient, learning new skills. So I do enjoy food from different parts of the world, but I've never learned how to cook those myself. So during the pandemic, I've actually learned some of those skills. So now I try cooking different things and posting them on Twitter to get feedback from people. Does my injera look correct? Does my thing I just made look right? If not, people say you need a little bit more water. You need to cook it a little longer. And I just take that feedback. So I'm always studying those kind of skills in addition to the tech skills.
Cool. I think this is related to the question that I see here from Danang Wibisono. His question is, how do you manage stress while working remotely? How do you optimize your resting time?
Yeah, I've been working remotely for the last 15 years almost.
Okay.
And so for me, I've always tried to balance my communication style. So number one, letting people know what I'm working on. So I'm not worried about if people understand the value that I'm adding. So I typically try to make sure that it's very clear. So sometimes that means writing things down in a doc, giving people updates of where I am on certain things, and I keep in a maintained calendar so people know the things that I'm committed to and
Okay.
know when those things are done. The other thing is also knowing what everyone else is up to in the
Oh,
world
okay.
that I care about. So staying paying attention. So I think stress comes from when we don't know or when things aren't going right. So I try to have as much information as I can, specifically when we're all working remote, right? You don't want to miss out on something super important.
That's
So,
right.
and then the last thing I'll say here is maintaining relationships. Every once in a while, I would just have a conversation with someone, just one on one, just to catch up, just
Yeah.
to talk about and preserve the relationship we built over the years.
Cool. Thank you for the answer. I hope that answered your question, Danang. There is another question from Ahmad Saputra. So, what's your opinion? The useful. Do you have any suggestion about the useful fundamental resources? I think what he says, do you have any fundamental resource that useful for a high school student to get started with Kubernetes?
I would always ask why would they want to use Kubernetes in high school? Like to me, Kubernetes is infrastructure. You know what I mean? Like to me, and this is just my opinion, maybe in high school they want to go into system administration. So yes, maybe they should go learn Kubernetes. Maybe you start with a simple book or Raspberry Pis and you put the whole thing together and they can learn the fundamentals of networking. They can learn the fundamentals of Linux. If it was me teaching someone in high school, I would definitely try to do something where you're doing things from the ground up. I think it's okay to learn Linux to understand how that works and what the world is without Kubernetes,
Yeah.
and then maybe slowly build up. So there's all of these Raspberry Pi products, but for high school students, I would think about networking, Linux, and then layer up until you get to something like Kubernetes. I don't know if I would just say, here's Kubernetes, because I don't know if they would understand the value and it would just like, oh, I'm just learning Kubernetes because you've asked me to. The fundamentals are what happens before Kubernetes so they can understand the challenge. And so then they'll have the fundamentals. So when I say Kubernetes does orchestration, well, they'll understand what orchestration is
Yeah.
when you have to do it manually first.
Yeah, I think what happened in, I don't know, especially in this country, I think when people keep talking about Kubernetes, microservices, and a lot of hype word, right? There are some people, let's say student, that don't want to feel missing out of this technology. So instead of try to learn basic, they want to directly jump into the technology that is hot right now. But I think that that's true. I think let's start from fundamental. I think it's not too late, right? If you are still in high school, but you still learn about Linux and networking and that kind of basic stuff.
Yeah, because if Kubernetes breaks, how are you going to troubleshoot? Like you know what I mean? Like Kubernetes is a layer that sits on top. I'm not saying you have to learn everything, but
Yeah.
be patient with learning is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, that's right. Be patient. Interesting. Thank you, Kelsey. There is another question from Kurnianto Trilaksono. So, what's your take about the development of serverless community compared to Kubernetes community?
Yeah, I'm really interested in serverless right now because if we get it right, then we can get closer to utility computing. Like if you think about in your house, you have electric socket, you can just plug something into the wall, it works. Energy is, pretty effective, is low. There's a nice power systems in many places in many countries, and everyone can use it. Everyone knows how to use electricity for the most part, safely and consistently. In infrastructure today, you have to do too much work. Linux, VM, Autoscale Group, Terraform, Kubernetes, Prometheus, it's too much. So I think in the serverless community, I think they're trying to have a solution that when you deploy your app, that's it. Infrastructure just well connected. The choices are made. One thing I do like though is that even the serverless platforms are starting to standardize on things like containers, Prometheus, OpenTelemetry. So I think what we're doing now with the Kubernetes world is we're experimenting on workload types, right? If you think about Google Cloud serverless offering, Cloud Run, well, we've adopted the Knative API, right? So we're bringing in these standards that are happening in the open source community. And I think that's going to really be the thing that makes serverless take off because it will no longer just be proprietary, only works in a small, one cloud provider. What if we do adopt industry standards where things become somewhat portable, not 100%, but close? I want to be able to reuse my skills. So I think that's where I really like the focus on the serverless community of delivering solutions and not just low-level technology.
Okay, cool. So just wondering, in your opinion, how long this serverless technology will start to catch up with the Kubernetes?
Well, I just think they're just two different things, right?
Okay.
Serverless. So I think at any point in time, there's still mainframes from the 70s. There's still bare metal. There's still VMs. There's still Kubernetes, and there's still serverless. And I don't think there's ever going to be one that takes over the other for a long, long time. You're talking like 30, 40 years. So I don't think that's the goal. I think the goal, though, is to have some competitiveness, though. If you have an application that works for serverless, why wouldn't you use that first? I think Kubernetes is always going to be really good at people who want to get high resource utilization. If they can tweak and tune Kubernetes, I think we're going to do a good job. But also, I see things like GKE Autopilot that is taking Kubernetes closer to serverless.
Yeah.
So you keep the Kubernetes API, you get a lot of the same integrations, but you don't have to do as much cluster management. So then it becomes about what workload API do you want? Do you want Kubernetes deployment? Do you want Kubernetes cron job? Or do you want something that looks like Knative that runs in Cloud Run? I think that's where we're going to land.
I see. Okay, that's interesting. There's a question from Barik Nurlis. So how do students get benefit from doing open source while studying? Is it worth doing while we are bombarded with school stuff?
Yeah, I think open source is just where the innovation happens. It is the application of everything you're studying. You know, if you want to be a computer scientist, of course, computer science is not just about infrastructure and programming languages. There's just more general things you could do. But when it comes to this field of software development, software engineering, and cloud, well, that's where we work. When you graduate, that's where a lot of the work happens. That's where the APIs are built, designed, and implemented. So the way I like to think about this is you don't have to have 100 open source projects you contribute to. I think it is helpful, though, to maybe just pick one. Maybe you like Python. You can go write documentation in the Python community. You can review Python proposals. Maybe you can write some libraries and share with other people. And I think the value is that when you graduate, you want to have the skills of knowing how to use version control, learning how to use GitHub, having a workflow, and getting to know people in that community and the professional community in which you plan to work. So I think it's a good investment of time.
Yeah, cool. It's a good investment. So you can start learning so that you start investing your time in open source. Cool. Thank you, Kelsey. There is a question from Wisu Suntoyo. Hi, Kelsey. As a hiring manager, what would be the basic to find good cloud engineering talent?
I mean, everybody's looking for great engineering talent, right? So I think you're going to try your best to make sure that it's attractive to work. For example, I work with a lot of startups, and when I look at their job postings, it's not clear why a great engineer will come work there. Oh, we just want a general programmer to do general programming stuff. I can go anywhere for that. Why would I uniquely want to come work at your company? What am I going to be working on? What is the actual opportunity? And I think a lot of people don't think about the presentation of the opportunity. They just do it as a job. We have jobs. You need a job. Come get a job. Then you're just going to be fighting for, maybe just more generalists. But if you really want great talent, then great talent wants to come and work on great problems. Do you have great problems? Does your website show off the great problems? Does your job posting show off the great problems? And then again, we talked about this earlier. You're not going to always get senior engineers for everything you want to do. So maybe start thinking about, can we take junior engineers and invest in them so they can become great engineers?
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's interesting. There is one. I will take one last question from the participants. This is interesting. So there is a funny phenomenon in Indonesia right now, because there are a lot of Zoom meeting, right, and online meeting. Some people start having multiple meeting at once. That's funny thing, and I still don't know how they can do that. Yeah, but I'm not gonna ask whether you are doing that or not. But I know
I'm not.
You're not doing that there for sure. But the question is, how do you manage the time in your work for, let's say, I will spare this much of time for meetings, I will spare this for learning and that kind of thing. How do you do that after you have 15 years experience?
Yeah, so sometimes on my calendar, right, I will just put blocks.
Okay.
Learning. The next 2 hours, I'm learning, or I'm preparing for design, or I'm reading a design. So a lot of times, since we're all remote, remember I said about communicating with people, letting them know what you're doing? I think the calendar is a great way of doing that. If you only have 8 hours in a day or 10 hours, whatever your work schedule is, if you put, hey, I'm going to be working on this for 2 hours, and then I'm going to be writing code for 3 hours, that means there's only 3 hours in a day for meetings. And so
Okay.
when people go to book a meeting, they'll see, wow, he is actually working at this time. And that helps communicate to people that if you book all the time, then I'll never get to do any work, or I have to do work at nighttime, therefore not bringing my best self in the morning because everyone needs rest.
Okay. I think I should also say that the power of saying no or power of clicking the reject button on the calendar is also important. What do you think about that? Because even though we already book our calendar, like let's say for learning and that kind of thing, people keep coming and then, hey, I need this meeting, this is urgent and that kind of thing. How did you find that kind of situation, and what did you tell to the people that asking you for meeting where you don't basically have any time anymore?
You know what? You just got to be honest. And sometimes yes, and then you have to say no later. I mean, people will be disappointed if you say yes. So this is why I just try to my best proactively block off your calendar so you don't have to say no. The calendar will say no for you. But you just tell people, hey, I need to work. So if they invite you, it's an invitation. It's not an obligation. You can just click no, and then usually get put a reason. Hey, I'll be working at this time. Maybe let's reschedule next week. Right. So you try to give people safe boundaries of time, but saying no is, I think, your job because no one really knows whether you have the time or not. The next thing I'll do is just ask, is this a decision meeting? Do we really need this meeting? Can you just send me a doc beforehand so we can just read the doc? Or are we actually making a decision? If we're not really making a decision, then maybe just share a doc and then we'll decide if we need to meet.
Yeah. So I think for some people, I think it's okay just to say no. But I think in Indonesia, it's a little bit complicated, right? The culture that we have usually tend to make people afraid to say no. So that's why sometimes people are just, okay, I will have my time for you. And that kind of, so they ended up working over hours. And yeah, they basically have no work-life balance anymore if they keep doing that. But yeah, I think I do agree that having...
Yes, I think the US has that problem too. I think for me, I've just helped train people around me. If you want me to be at my best,
I see.
Then I need to be able to actually work.
Yeah.
Right? I come to work to work. I don't come to work to only meet. Right? They don't call it go to meetings, right? They call it go to work. Yeah. So in order to work, so if you just go on your calendar, just try it. Say, I'm working. What are you working on? The thing you asked me to do. I'm working on that during this time. Yeah. And so then they'll ask themselves, yeah, you know what? Let's meet at nighttime then. Let's meet at a time that's inconvenient for everyone. Oh, no. We don't want to do meetings at night. My point, right? So I don't really want to work at night. So let me work during the day. So I think allow the calendar to communicate and then chip away, right? I get it. I think a lot of managers forget that people need to actually work. And so what you have to do is just try to educate people. I cannot be in all of these meetings. Can we just make sure that we think of meetings very strategically?
Yeah, cool. Thank you so much. I hope everyone here will take that into their heart so that they can start doing it after this. So, Kelsey, I think we are approaching the end of this session, and I have one last question for closing. Is there any closing statement, messages, or advice that you can give to Indonesian tech community and probably to students as well before we close this?
It's funny, Google has this phrase, we call it respect opportunity. And I think what you have to do is understand the opportunity you have. You don't have to replicate the US tech community. You don't have to replicate the European tech community. I think the opportunity you all have is to identify what the Indonesian tech community will be. And then you become the leaders of those things. And that way you can bring your culture to us. When you visit the US, bring your culture. I remember I met someone from India at PyCon one year, and they brought me something from India. And he told me that my style matched a similar teaching style in India. And he explained it to me. And I learned a lot about his culture and his way of thinking about the world. So I think that's the opportunity. Don't miss that opportunity because you have your own unique identity. And to be honest with you, the world needs new ideas. And those new ideas will come from you really appreciating your own culture, using that as leverage and then introducing something new to the plate. So don't be afraid of that opportunity.
Okay, cool. I think thank you so much, Kelsey, for sparing your time. It really means a lot to all of us here. And then, yeah, that's all. I think thank you so much, everyone, for attending this session. Hope that you will learn a lot. And yeah, don't just come to this event. Ask question to the next session that you will have. And then, yeah, that's all. Thank you, Kelsey, once again. Take care and have a good night there. See you.
Thanks for
Okay,
having me.
bye-bye.
Bye.